Good afternoon, everyone. I understand that I'm live, so what I just said is off the record, but we will get started. I hope you've all had a very good day. I'm Elliot Gerson with the Aspen Institute, and our topic now is personalized medicine. The future is now, and our theme, of course, for Spotlight Health is imagining health in a decade from now. So we, with this wonderfully distinguished panel, can talk about how much is real now, how much might be real between now and 2024, and how much might be really wishful thinking and the holy grail for medical research, diagnosis, and treatment. In alphabetical order, Harvey Fineberg is president of the Institute of Medicine. Before that, he was provost of Harvard University. Before that, he was the dean of the public health school at Harvard. His expertise is broad and deep, with particular emphases in health policy, medical decision-making, vaccines, medical innovation, and he has recently moved from the board of the Hewlett Foundation to be chairman of the board, something I want to mention because we're often generously supported by that foundation. Margaret Hamburg is commissioner of the FDA, a position that she has had since 2009. You must have probably one of the longer tenures of anyone in this administration.
And
so you must
most FDA commissioners, too.
And most FDA commissioners. She was New York City's health commissioner, assistant secretary of HHS in the Clinton administration. She was also one of the youngest people ever elected to the Institute of Medicine at an earlier point in her career. She did research in neuroscience, neuropharmacology, developed a model followed through much of the world relating to the treatment of tuberculosis, and is also a leader in issues relating to bioterrorism, heaven forbid. Elizabeth Holmes is founder and CEO of Theranos. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
You are.
Which she founded in 2003 as a Stanford sophomore. She soon dropped out in the grand tradition of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs to pursue that full time. And she is on her way, we all hope, to be as transformative in aspects of the medical system as perhaps Steve Jobs was in his own way. Theranos is an amalgam of the words therapy and diagnosis. And it could revolutionize laboratory tests, diagnosis, and preventive medicine. And she will tell us a little bit about the company. Although if any of you have seen what I think is still the latest issue of Fortune magazine, with a huge and incredibly flattering profile, I think both Elizabeth's and Theranos' days of being under most people's radar are now behind us. So personalized medicine, seems to be a vision of a time when someone can have a very simple diagnostic test, perhaps provided by your company, can be transferred electronically to a physician, if the physician even needs to be involved. Before one can even get to the physician's office, a diagnosis can be developed based on the unique genetic characteristics of the individual. By the time one gets to the office, a particular tailored therapy can be developed for that individual. Similarly, instead of a diagnosis, there could be an analysis that could lead to opportunities to provide recommendations relating to prevention, so the disease might not ever develop. So I guess our question that we can explore is, to what degree is that realistic? Is it something that is overly optimistic and hyped? What are some of the ethical and financial issues relating to this idea of tailoring therapies to a person's individual genetic characteristics? So let's start, continuing in alphabetical order, with you, Harvey. And I wonder, let's start with a definition. What actually is meant, or what do you think of about personalized medicine? I mean, on the one hand, one would think that almost all medicine, from the point of view of a layman, is personalized. It's about a patient and that person's conditions, unless perhaps it's like you're big idea of yesterday, and it's a mass population vaccination or something about that. So what is really different about personalized medicine as it's now talked about today?
Well, thanks, Elliot, for the question, and I'm glad that you attributed my going first to alphabet and not age, and thank you for that. And also, thank you for assembling this panel. I feel so privileged to be with Elizabeth and with Peggy, and I look forward to hearing their comments through this afternoon. In a sense, you're absolutely right. Personalized medicine, if you think of it as just medicine intended to deal with an individual's condition and to understand the problem of that individual and to treat that individual, has been with us ever since modern medicine. In fact, pre-modern medicine. You could go back to ancient Greek medicine and it was still individualized in that sense. But what has really altered the notion of personalized today is the advent of the human genome and the notion that we now can get very much more precise genetic information, genomic content about both individuals and their individual cells in the case of disease cells. And that has engendered in turn a notion that if we can understand more precisely the makeup of the individual and of the disease problem, such as a cancer, and if we can tailor more precisely the notion of diagnosis and the notion of treatment, we'll get to a way of dealing with medical problems that is unimaginable in the pre-genomic era and is highly tailored to the individual circumstances of that particular patient. So personalized today has taken up this meaning of using individualized genomic and other information to tailor both diagnosis and treatment, prognosis as well as prevention to that individual's particular needs.
I think it was the National Academy's report a couple of years ago called Toward Precision Medicine. Is that concept, precision medicine, the same? I mean, as what people talk about as personalized medicine?
A lot of different terms have been applied to this same concept, and they're more or less interchangeable. Individualized, personalized, precision, all are used by different people at different times. There's a notion of what was called 4P medicine, which was personalized and predictive and preventive and participatory. But even then, it was an incomplete description because people thought, well, we're also talking about preemptive medicine, stopping something before it starts in an individual. What's unique today is that the old idea of diagnosis, which really mostly today is still premised on a 19th century concept of pathology, where you look at the tissue, you examine under a microscope, you see what the pathology looks like, and it's the appearance that determines the diagnosis, the correct diagnosis. Today, with molecular knowledge and genomic knowledge, the specific molecular profile of the individual cell can be a more important differentiator than the old ways of just looking at appearance. So you could have two different kinds of cancer, for example, in two different tissues that have a similar biological marker and therefore are amenable to the same treatment, even though their appearance and their location in the body may be quite distinct.
What does that mean as well for the taxonomy of disease? I think,
well,
and you know, the very definition of disease, instead of diseases being defined around symptoms or by what you see in the microscope, diseased. I mean, are we going to have a new taxonomy in terms of what is a disease, or even what a medical profession is? Are we still going to have cardiologists and oncologists? Or are they going to be specialists in the micro biology of the causes of these diseases?
Well, we'll have cardiologists and oncologists for a long time, so they can rest assured they're going to be needed. But coming back to the first question, I do believe that we're going to evolve a very different notion of what is a meaningful diagnosis in terms of matching the condition to the treatment. In some theoretical way, hypothetical way, the term diagnosis itself is almost an intermediary between the patient's presentation, whether it's the symptoms they feel or what the doctor and other diagnostic testing can discover, and the matching to the appropriate treatment. It's a label that we apply. And in some ways, that label could almost become less relevant because you're able to take precise information about the individual patient's trajectory and present circumstance and map it directly to the best treatment. And so it is going to, I think, radically change our notion of the diagnosis over time.
Okay, well, and we'll get from all of you about where we are today as opposed to perhaps in the future. But Peggy, let's turn to you. To start, what is the FDA role in all of this?
Well, the FDA role is pretty significant, and actually we define personalized medicine a little broader than the discussion so far. Clearly, one major area of focus is what advances in science and technology have enabled through the sequencing of the human genome and other genomes, and the ability to really target therapies in new ways and identify differences in subpopulations to therapies or interventions because of genetic makeup or markers, and really understanding a lot more about the underlying mechanism of disease in that context. It also, though, is about finding a way to tailor interventions to the patient before you or the subpopulation of patients before you that it does extend further. And at the FDA, we think about it in other areas too, including stem cell therapy, where we have the opportunity to, through manipulation of your own tissue or other tissues, to personalize a treatment, to restore function, through, in the device area, biological imaging that allows us to really understand the anatomy of an individual so the device can be tailored to be a better fit and more functional. Or 3D printing is now becoming a real thing in medicine, where you can actually create components of the human body to replace areas where you had a genetic malformation or an injury and you need a part of your skull replaced, et cetera. So FDA has a critical role to play across a range of domains that we consider to be personalized medicine. And what our role is both identifying critical needs and opportunities and trying to work with industry to develop innovative approaches to address those, and then assessing these new products for safety, efficacy, quality, and performance, and really also working across the life cycle. Many people think that FDA only is involved in approving or not approving a product that comes before us. But in fact, we have a critical role in shaping the research and development process in terms of how a promising new idea or discovery in science or technology becomes a product. We then do have to assess for safety, efficacy, quality, and performance. But then also, for so many products, we have a life cycle approach where we continue to study and learn post-approval when these products are being used in the marketplace. So we are very much in the midst of this world.
Both Harvey and you mentioned human genome, and that's 10 or 11 years ago. Let's talk about what's actually happening. I mean, when that happened, there was enormous excitement, a lot of hype and hoopla and optimism. And what's actually been the experience in the last 10 or 11 years in terms of cures relating to the opportunity that presented? It seems that many people would be disappointed compared to what we heard 10 years ago. And I think it was actually right here, maybe 2 years ago, you were on a panel with, I don't know if Zeke Emanuel is out here, I know he's around.
And Corby was moderating, I remember it well.
And as I recall, he said, personalized medicine is a myth. And I don't think you believe that, but
No.
I mean, where are these developments? Are they in the pipeline?
Well, I think that...
Why isn't there an explosion of these targeted remedies?
Well, there's an explosion of knowledge and there's an explosion of capability, and it's advancing really very quickly when you put it in context, including the price of being able to use this technology. It was $3 billion for the original sequencing.
Now what does it cost?
Now
About
it's,
$1,000?
I think it's $3,000 today. Elizabeth might know better, but they're expecting it'll be down to $1,000 in just a few years.
That's a bigger progression than Moore's Law would
Exactly. So there's a lot going on. And from where I sit at the FDA, it is influencing the products that we see before us, and it certainly is influencing the experience of patients. I think perhaps people expected too much too soon, but it is making a difference. We, in recent years, have approved quite a number of important products that are based on understanding the underlying genetic composition of a tumor, specific traits of a person, and a targeted therapy where there's a link to a diagnostic and the therapy that's given. And we've seen some things that are transformative. It doesn't have to be a cure, that's the goal, but things that are extending life in very meaningful ways. And one drug for cystic fibrosis is only for a very small number of patients who have a specific genetic marker. But cystic fibrosis is a disease that we've never had a treatment for the underlying mechanism of disease, only for the symptoms. These kids that are now getting this new drug based on the genetic diagnostic marker are actually now getting off the transplant list and getting onto the soccer field.
Wow.
So it's really amazing to see. So that tells me there is progress and there will be more. Also, many of the drugs that are currently in use now have, as part of their label, genetic information to better tailor their use, whether it's if you have a certain genetic trait, you may respond differently to that drug and have unacceptable side effects. There's an AIDS drug, an antiviral that's very important for care, but it was going out of use because too many people were having side effects that were intolerable. But now we know that some have it, some don't, and we can still get that drug to the patients who need it. Or another drug, a blood thinning drug. We know that if you have a certain marker, you will metabolize the drug differently, and you need to start with a lower dose. So this is a drug that's hard to manage in terms of getting the dose right. So this is enormously helpful to the physician and to the patients. So we're seeing this in the real world, and there'll be lots more discoveries and lots more opportunities to apply this exciting new science to real-world products for people.
Well, Elizabeth, let's go to your real world, a brave new world, and tell us a little bit about Theranos and how it might be a component and a bridge from now to the future in terms of these kinds of developments.
Sure. Our focus has been on access to actionable health information and the belief that it is a basic human right for every person to be able to afford accurate health diagnostics at the time it matters. And so when we think about this personalized medicine world, we've looked at it a lot in terms of the individual. And before you even get to the question of a genomic test or if a gene is present, whether it's expressed, and then how it changes over time, the ability to engage an individual in basic testing, because in our country, people say that 40 to 60% of people here are not compliant with physicians' requisitions for laboratory tests, and as a result, you see this paradigm of people having to say goodbye too soon. And so we've looked at the question of access in terms of what are the reasons that people don't get tested. And cost is one. We spent 10 years building out a framework that allows us to bill Medicare and Medicaid at a fraction of their current reimbursement threshold. So anywhere from 50 to 90% off of Medicare reimbursement rates so that irrespective of whether someone still today is uninsured or insured but with a high deductible, or on a private plan, Medicare, Medicaid, they can afford access to a test. And
these are blood tests, and for how broad kind of testing are you able to do?
It's routine laboratory tests as well as specialty and esoteric tests. It's like a reference lab, a traditional reference lab, and what's interesting to that is that so many people are talking about new markers or predictive markers, but we're quite interested in the question of if you could collect data for tests that have traditionally been run, but do so in a higher integrity way. For example, on a fresh sample that has not been sitting around for 4 hours before it's been analyzed and therefore experiencing some type of decay in, for example, the proteins that you might want to be measuring, or minimizing pre-analytic error in the context of the human processing that goes into traditional handling of samples. And if you could get people to begin engaging in the process of getting tested on a recurring basis so that you don't just have a baseline or a snapshot of their lab values at any given point in time, but a physician has the movie of how those values change over time, then the expression of, for example, changes in proteins in a person's body over time, or even routine laboratory parameters over time, starts to become a very interesting tool. And even the existence of known markers start to become very interesting in the context of presenting a richer data set back to the physician. So when we think about the individual, we think about engagement, and a huge area of access also for us, in addition to cost, was minimizing the amount of blood or urine or feces that has to be drawn.
It's much easier for the patient as well, as I understand it. You just essentially tap. It's almost like a tap.
It's a few drops of blood, and the result is that that people are more compliant. We see people coming in who haven't fulfilled their physician requisitions for years, and if you can get them engaged in that process, then you can start thinking about quote-unquote individualized medicine in terms of how are those parameters changing over time, and what can a physician do with that in terms of providing care to the patient.
It seems as if consumer empowerment is a key theme and driver for what you do, and I wonder if you could just talk about consumer empowerment in the context of today's healthcare system and what you think it could be with some of the developments you're engaged in and we've been talking about.
Absolutely. This is an area that we've spent a lot of time on and done a lot of work around. We're a high complexity CLIA certified lab. We are submitting every single one of our laboratory tests to FDA. And we believe very strongly that if you can build a system wherein you can realize the highest levels of quality and create the oversight through pathologists and other people to ensure that the testing is good, then individuals must have the right to access testing. For example, in California, I can go buy a gun and kill myself, but I can't order a vitamin D test because I might do something dangerous with it, right? And the concept that by law, people who have heart disease or who have diabetes who would really like to be engaged in the process of trying to figure out if they're okay or if they need to do something to change their life, today they can't do that. We think there's ways within the existing regulatory framework to create models that can facilitate that consumer empowerment.
Could I comment on this?
Please.
I think it's so appropriate, Elizabeth's discussion in the context of Peggy's broadened explanation of the whole scope of precision medicine, because what Elizabeth is describing has revolutionary potential on so many levels. And in particular, I think the point that Elizabeth was making about testing in a way that gives each individual patient their personal trajectory of results is so radically different from the way every doctor today determines quote normal or quote abnormal test results. The way it's done today, if you have a creatinine or any measure of your blood and the result comes back, and you'll see if there's an asterisk or not an asterisk beside it. Is it within or outside the abnormal range? What does that actually mean? What that means is that there's been testing done on a large number of people. They've scoped out the distribution of the normal tests, and they've set boundaries of 95%, so that your result, if it's outside what 95% of the population that isn't known to have any disease has, that's flagged as abnormal. That's about as far as we've gotten in 100 years of testing. If you have a model which can test people sequentially, cheaply, easily, accurately, and have results that are attributed to that person over time, it opens up a completely different way of thinking about what is normal for you and what is changing in you that might warrant attention. So this is really moving from horizontal thinking to vertical thinking. And it's a very, very different way of interpreting, as you started us on, what is a diagnosis, and thinking about what's meaningful in terms of information that might lead to later intervention. It's really exciting. At the same time, to know how to interpret these individualized sequential testing patterns, that's a big data challenge. So there's going to be an enormous amount of new learning that will have to be done to understand the clinical relevance of any kind of variation in your personal result. How much of it is just variation by the time of day? We know a lot of things vary just by whether it's morning or night. How much of it is just for women variation by the time of month in their period? How much of it may be related to other, in a way, extraneous environmental factors as opposed to genuine signals about the potential for disease? So it's exciting, it's very, very promising, and it's going to mean a lot of intensive scientific work to be able to take full advantage of it.
Let me ask a different question, though, although I'm excited to hear the references to cheaply a number of times. A lot of these things sound incredibly expensive to me, especially when you deal with these highly targeted therapies to very small numbers of people with fairly exotic conditions. And I think many of us heard Risa speak this morning about how zip codes often are greater determinants of our health than our genetic code. And given health disparities that exist now, aren't there prospects that this new world of personalized medicine is going to exacerbate health inequity? That if someone is rich and can afford the tests, although now they're coming down in cost, but also some of these therapies, that they will have far better outcomes than other people. Is personalized medicine something for the affluent, or is it for the 7 billion people?
Well, I think this has been a big part of the discussion as personalized medicine has sort of really taken shape. Is it sort of medicine for the elite or for the masses? And I think you have to step back a little bit and think about what are we able to do. We're going to be able to provide people with the right treatment at the right time, at the right dose for them. And over time, hopefully the costs of the drugs themselves may come down, but that's a huge issue. But think of all the other savings in the system. If you're thinking about what it takes to cover the care of a person for their lifetime, it's a lot better if you can know that you're giving them the treatment that they need, even if it's expensive, than giving them a lot of other expensive treatments that actually aren't going to make a difference, maybe will cause other problems as well. So I think that if we can make our health care system work more effectively and actually know how to treat them in a more appropriate way, make sure that they're actually getting the tests that they need, and that is then acted on, preventing or limiting progression of serious, expensive diseases that are expensive not just in terms of cost to the healthcare system, but the burden of disease to those individuals, their families, and their productivity, quality of life, and their options for a full life. There are savings here, But I think we all have sticker shock. FDA does not look at price when we make our decisions. We are a science-based regulatory agency with a public health mission, and we look at the data and we assess for safety, efficacy, quality, and performance, not having any idea what the drugs will cost. But some of the drugs that we have considered breakthrough drugs in terms of their impact on health have also been extraordinarily expensive. The one I mentioned for cystic fibrosis, I think it costs about $300,000 a year. It's life-changing, but it is expensive. The recent drug we approved for hepatitis C, which will result in cures dramatically, is also one of these drugs where everybody is just sort of gasping at the price.
Other than the cost and equity issues, there are many people who raise ethical issues, and there are obviously compelling ethical issues here, including, are there things we don't want to know about our future? I mean, do we want to test for things that there may be no cures for? Or as a parent, do we want to test our children? Do we want to, if a test reveals that we have some degenerative, a proclivity for a degenerative disease for which there is no cure? Who is thinking about these kinds of issues as we go down this path? And even the possibility for discrimination. I mean, if employers know that I'm going to get a degenerative disease when I'm 45 years old, they may not treat me the same way.
I think that ethical question in line with the points that were just made about the test, I think one of the first questions is, can we get to a point where we truly know that tests are predicting something? I think one of the reasons that we focused on tests that are generally ordered by physicians today is that while a lot of work has been done with genetic testing, I don't think we're at a point right now where people can say you have this gene and therefore you have this outcome. And one of the interesting things about the pathology community is that these are people who are trained to help interpret laboratory data, and if you can equip them with this type of information and you can do the kind of clinical studies that are required to demonstrate some sort of predictive power, you can get to a point in which you have an understanding of what you're talking about in terms of whether a test means something or not, and whether you should be saying those things or not. If the cost of those tests can be low enough, which it absolutely can, when you think about applying a technology business model to healthcare in the context of lowering the cost of tests, then ultimately we believe it has to be an individual's choice. If you have a good test and you have scientifically demonstrated whatever it is that you're going to say about it, then someone must be able to choose whether or not they want to know that information about themselves or not. That must be a basic human right, right?
Your question is not just a hypothetical about the future, it's today. If you have a family condition like Huntington's disease, where you have had ancestors who died from the condition, you know that you have a risk of developing that condition yourself. You'll be asymptomatic, often through young adulthood, but you have a risk if you carry the wrong gene to be suffering from that disease, which is a fatal illness. So everyone in families today with Huntington's face the question.
Do I get tested or not? Do I want to know or not?
And I think just as we often talk in healthcare about your right to know, I think as Elizabeth, I believe, is saying, you also have a right to not know. And particularly, you have a right not to have information about you misused. And so that's where we get to legal protection as well as choices of policy at different levels and personal and business choices. So it should, in fact, be illegal to misuse private information that should not be available to others. So whether we can succeed in keeping it private once it's revealed to someone, even just to the patient, is a separate question from the legal penalty that should be in place for misuse and the prohibition against misuse.
Let me just ask each of you, and then I'm going to turn it over to all of you, so please be thinking of questions. Just if you care to, we were talking a lot about prediction and genetic prediction. What do you see 10 years from now, looking at 2024, in the area of personalized medicine? If you had to describe how things are going to be fundamentally different just a decade from now.
Well, I'll start. I mean, I think that the science and technology is unfolding so quickly, and we are really changing our whole model and approach to medical product development because we know so much more about the underlying mechanisms of disease, and really, are looking at what are the best targets and opportunities for product development. I think that the next decade is going to be full of really dramatic and powerful advances in terms of biomedical product innovation. I think the challenge is going to be, how are we going to pay for them, and how are we going to ensure that there is an equitable and fair distribution, not just across sectors in this country, but also internationally as well. But I think we really are in a position to see huge advance because of where the science and technology is leading us.
Harvey?
I think that in 10 years, we're going to see ourselves from a position where today there are perhaps 600 plus ways in which genomic information can be utilized, specifically in different conditions. A group called the Personalized Medicine Coalition just released a report which enumerates the progress and the advances. So in 10 years, there could be 10 times that number that are known and usable. Secondly, I think that technologies that combine improvement in performance and lower cost, as we're hearing about Theranos' business model, those technologies are going to be the sweet spot for medicine over the next 10 years, because the cost trajectory that we're on is unsustainable, and we do demand and expect improving performance. The wrong place to save money is on the development of innovative technology that can save more lives and create opportunities for healthier life for people who are suffering from illness. We have to do all the preventive work, as you described, and we have to save a lot of money in healthcare, but there are lots of places to save it without infringing on the future generation's opportunity to be the beneficiary of even more personalized medicine.
And if I could just jump on, I don't want to get in the way of Elizabeth responding to your question, but I think it's also important to realize that as we have this much more targeted drug development, it's going to take less time and it's going to be cheaper because the drugs work better. The underlying rationale for the drug is much better than the old model, the blockbuster drug model, where we just sort of something that was going to have very incremental benefit and where we just sort of thought that this chemical would work, and you'd have to test it in thousands and thousands of people to begin to see the benefit. And this is really different, and we're approving drugs with a few hundred, sometimes less, patients in trials, and very different kinds of trial designs, cheaper, quicker, and really producing products that are proven with scientific rigor and make a difference. So I think you can see the real promise beginning to emerge.
I think that excitement and optimism must explain why you're still in your position. Elizabeth?
I think, in line with this discussion, we're going to be at a point in which we're not just talking about genetic testing, but we're really looking at how are those genes expressed over time in an individual, and how do they change, and how are they influenced by the environmental factors that do affect an individual response to a specific therapy, and how an individual progresses with a certain disease condition. I believe that we will see physician-centric and pathologist-centric models where pathologists play a key role in helping to interpret some of this information with physicians, or for physicians in the context of clinical care. And I also believe that we're going to get to a point in which individuals are able to take more ownership in their own health outcomes and the outcomes of the people they love, because the systems can be put in place to be able to do that safely and accurately within the ecosystem of the physician and the pathologist and the regulatory framework.
Thank you. And let me turn it to the audience, and if you could wait for a microphone. I see we have lots of questions. The gentleman in the blue shirt here, and maybe, do we have 2 microphones? Maybe you could just pick people out for me and move the microphone to the next person so we can do it as quickly as possible, please.
Yeah, hi, Rich Besser from ABC News. You've been talking a lot about the future benefit of personalized medicine and genomics and testing in terms of disease treatment. But one of the things that concerns me has been the promise that's put out in terms of personalized medicine and testing for prevention. Could you talk a little bit about whether the future in terms of prevention lies in increased testing, or as Elliot was saying, more dealing with those factors related to zip code?
Well, I'm sure others will have perspective on this. I mean, prevention is the goal, but prevention is complicated. I think certainly some of this genetic testing can help give an individual information that they can then use to understand where their risks are, and they can make changes in their lifestyle to adapt. For example, if you know that you have a predisposition for diabetes, exercise, diet can make a difference, and so you can make critical changes. Or if you have obviously certain indications of other kinds of disease processes, there are other things that you can do. So that targeted information can make a difference, but success in terms of prevention, I think, is not going to be solely derived from more diagnostics, more markers, but it's also going to be derived from a whole set of factors in terms of lifestyle, environmental conditions, and other things as well. And it will be more of a population-based prevention approach in addition to more personalized. So prevention, I think, really gets you at the 2 ends of the continuum, the population-based approaches and the more targeted individual-specific opportunities to identify risks you have and modify those risks.
Isn't there also, just excuse me, a risk with personalized medicine, this notion that if we simply understand our genetics well enough, we really don't need to worry about our own environment. We don't have to worry as much about what we eat, how we live our life, our habits, our customs, our exercise. There's going to be a pill that is going to take care of me and my genetic predisposition, despite what I want to do about it.
People have a lot of faith in advances in science in that way, and there's not a magic bullet for almost anything that I can think of. But I do think that one of the things people have to realize is that there are many layers, and you can have a certain genetic predisposition, but it is, in fact, the broader context and often the environmental context or other biological factors that actually determine whether that genetic predisposition declares itself or not.
Right. Yeah. Okay, does someone have a microphone? Yes, here.
Yes. Is it on?
Yes.
Question for Elizabeth. As Elliot in the Fortune article highlighted, you're sort of the poster child now for disruptive technology. And given the fact that you have a pricing potential and 2 incumbents that you are threatening with an existential threat, and you've assembled and been thoughtful assembling this powerful board and all these forces, in spite of all that, what do you see as the biggest impediments now to being successful? This would sort of be helpful for us to understand, given politics and distribution and all the other forces out there. You're sort of at the starting gate now, and it would be instructive to understand how the healthcare marketplace is going to be dismantled by people like you that could really do something about it.
Take as much time as you need.
Thank you.
We can run over too.
Well, thank you for that question. You know, all of our work has not been in trying to dismantle anything, but in trying to help create better access to actionable health information. And in our experience, there's no shortcuts to any aspect of that, and it's a lot of work, and there's a lot of systems that have to be put in place and regulations that have to be followed to do it right. And we were having a conversation about the fact that if you're going to be providing information to a physician for clinical decision making, you better be right, and you better know that you're right every single time, and you better have the controls in place to be right every single time. So for us, we think about growth in the context of doing it right and putting the right frameworks in place, putting the right people in place, training the right people, making sure that every single time we serve a physician, we're providing the best possible experience, the best possible service, the best possible data, and the best possible oversight, so that each interaction, one by one, can build upon itself. And we genuinely believe that there's so much that can be done within the existing ecosystem. And we see technology as a tool for affecting change. It's not the answer. It's a vehicle for being able to help provide access to information that can feed behavioral changes or can feed decision making by physicians. So I think the answer to your question is you've got to do the work to put the systems in place to be able to do it right, and that takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of resources, and it takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But the ecosystem as it's set up can be served in that way, and it's not. I mean, when we think about a physician workflow, we're not changing that workflow. We're just consolidating a lot of processes that might have taken a lot more time or cost a lot more money. But ultimately providing them the net same service or result is what they're getting today through a traditional framework, if that answers your question.
Partially, I'm wondering about your competitors are going to throw everything at you.
You know, this is about patients and physicians, and if one by one we can provide. We had a person who came into our laboratory service center in Phoenix the other day, and he had lost all his limbs, and he came to our phlebotomist in the wellness center and said, "Could I do a finger stick?" And he didn't have any fingers, but he had a nub on his arm, and they called the lab. The lab said yes, and they did the little collection, and he was there with his girlfriend, and he looked at his girlfriend and he started crying, and he said, "Do you know what this means to me? Because the way they've drawn blood from him before is by sticking a big needle into his neck and doing an arterial draw. And if person by person we can help to touch their lives and create a better experience and do it well with the quality standards that are required to do it well, then that's what matters. And in our opinion, that's how we realize our mission.
There are two people with a microphone. Why don't we have both questions, and then our panelists will respond
you want
to
them
each.
Simultaneously? I'll go first. This is Matt Winnie. I split my time between the American Medical Association and the University of Colorado. And I'd like to return for a second to where you started us off, which is the notion that what physicians have tried to do over millennia is to deliver personalized care through getting to know the individual person, their values, their preferences, their experiences, and priorities, and so on. And in that light, I'd like to see if you'd be willing to tie together the discussion we're having now about biological precision and shared decision-making and the values and preferences piece of medical decision-making. And are there ways to integrate decision tools, facilitation tools into the use of personalized medicine in a more formalized way and to study that.
Why don't we go ahead and take that one, and then we still have time.
Shall I respond to that? Personalized medicine is not going to take doctors who are indifferent and make them compassionate. Instead, what we'll have here is a set of tools that will enable the doctor who is compassionate, who is caring, who is connected to her or his patients, and who sees the patient as a genuine partner and understands that it is about the patient and not about them, that this whole set of questions is organized. That doctor and patient can be greatly aided by having accurate, more complete, more relevant, and useful information at their disposal. So technology over time, it can be argued, has progressively distanced the doctor from the patient in the same way that the invention of the stethoscope meant you no longer, as a physician, needed to lay your head literally on the chest of the patient. You could sit apart, and robotic surgery means you don't even have to touch the patient to perform surgery on the patient today. These tools do not themselves bring doctors and patients more closely together. But when you have the right environment, the right trained clinicians, the right way of relating between patients and doctors, these technologies can be fantastic aids to better decision making.
And also, the same information garnered through the framework of personalized medicine may result in very different actions as the result of the interaction between the physician and their patient. You know, some patients who know what their BRCA status is with respect to risk for breast cancer or ovarian cancer may decide that they want to do a prophylactic mastectomy or oophorectomy. Others may decide they just want to sort of monitor and hope that better treatments will emerge if they do develop disease, et cetera. But it gives more tools for the discussion between physician and patient. And so in a way, it makes that relationship all the more important.
Okay, please.
I'm Barry Strouch, Chairman Emeritus, Department of Medicine.
Is the microphone on?
Put it closer to your face.
Barry Strouch, Chairman of Medicine, Emeritus, Department of Medicine, Inova Fairfax Hospital in the Washington area, and Trustee Emeritus of Johns Hopkins Medicine. We've mainly talked about genomics measurement here in terms of cancer with a little allusion to proteins. But in fact, you have those gene abnormalities for a long time, and you don't have the cancer, and that's the BRCA positive, and you don't know if they're ever going to get the cancer. But in terms of treatment, it would appear that there's something that happens between the genes and proteins that cause the tumor to actually get started and to grow. We have a company, and Elizabeth, we didn't borrow this name from you, and I now remember reading about your company some time ago, years ago, but not recently, and I don't read that particular Fortune magazine. Our company is called Theranos. Theranos Health in Rockville, Maryland, and we have very sophisticated, sensitive measurements of protein pathways, and we can measure if they're in activated states at individual proteins. We have 7 out of the 10 leading cancer companies are now using us and have been for the last 2 to 3 years in their drug development. We've gotten our CLIA this year, and we think the pathway in monitoring which drug to use is going to be based on the protein studies and not on the gene studies as we go into the future. That's a lot of food for thought.
I guess the answer is that biology is very complicated, and we don't know nearly as much as we need to know and hope to know in the future. And yes, these systems are very, very complicated, and all of the opportunities to make a difference for health in terms of both prevention and better treatment are not going to emerge from a focus on the genome. But I think understanding, all of human biology over time is really going to give us new strategies, new tools, and much, much better products.
Over here, does someone else have the microphone? I'm sorry, I can't really see very well. We'll come up right over here then. And whoever's next, we do have still a few minutes because we don't have anything immediately following this, and I don't want it to end, but it will have to end at some point. Please.
To be fair, I want it known, I was an investor in this little girl when she was 19. So congratulations on your cover story. The Fortune article is shocking. Would you do me a favor and explain and bring this conversation down to what people want to know is how does it affect me? What you told me over dinner that first day was the needle with the RFID chip and how quickly a doctor could get it. Would you explain that to people? Take 30 seconds, because it's quite shocking. And I don't think people understand how quickly the doctor can get that data and respond until you invented that and patented that.
Sure. I mean, going back to the point of access to actionable information, I think the goal is to be able to get information to the physician at the time they're seeing the patient. And so enabling data to be generated rapidly and to be reviewed within the laboratory framework by a pathology team and then fed back into the physician within a short period of time is a huge area of focus for us, because that enables the physician to have that data at the time they're seeing the patient. So for example, in Palo Alto today, if someone comes into one of our wellness centers in the morning, we're able to process those results within a few hours so that when they see their physician that afternoon, the physician has the data. And because we require so little blood, physicians can say on their lab ordering form, if, for example, they're running a standard CBC panel and hemoglobin is really low, automatically they can order follow-on tests like a B12 or an iron level so that when they're seeing their patient that afternoon, they have that data. And that changes the decision-making process, because you're no longer prophylactically treating patients because you're waiting for a follow-on lab order, because you don't have the values that are associated with something being out of range, because you need new big sets of tubes in order to properly triage the patient. And so our work has been in, going back to the access point, miniaturizing the sample size so that, and accelerating the reaction times so that the data can be very rapidly looped back in with the physician to help shape the care process.
Do we have another question here, please?
Question. Back to personalized medicine and looking at the proliferation of clinical studies and the amount of treatment options that are now available per condition. Do you see, or how do you look at things like IBM Watson and cognitive machine learning systems being able to look at all the data in the world and being able to bring back more effective treatment decision lists, if you will, to the practitioner so that the patient and the physician can make the right choices? Do you see that as being still a fundamental part of the solution in the future, or is that just so far off that we can't even think about it today?
I don't think it's far off at all. Watson beat Ken Jennings in Jeopardy. Did you ever watch Ken Jennings on a Jeopardy show? It was phenomenal. Watson was better at that game. I would say if you have a computer that you can program in real time to interpret spoken words and use a vast store of information on any topic that might come up within the domains that Jeopardy typically asks, that's not a big intellectual leap from the diagnostic problem in which you're taking information about a patient and you're trying to fit that against known patterns of disease expression of different signs and symptoms. And I would say if we're 10 years from now and we don't have Watson at least as a diagnostic back